The air in the room is cool and still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of beeswax candles that have burned low, their wicks curling into blackened anchors. Outside, the world has surrendered to a deep velvet blue. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the breadth of the heavy stone walls themselves, exhaling the warmth of a day long since departed. The high, vaulted ceilings of the hall hold a profound silence, a quiet so thick it feels like a soft woolen blanket draped over the shoulders of the night. There is no rush here. The hurried pace of the modern world is a ghost that hasn't been born yet. Here, time is measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow, rhythmic dripping of a water clock in the corner and the occasional muffled tolling of a distant bell marking the hour of matins. You are safe in this sanctuary of shadows. The floor beneath you is made of ancient, uneven flagstones, smoothed by centuries of sandaled feet. And as you settle into the stillness, the flickering orange light of the hearth paints dancing patterns against the tapestries. Tonight, we are drifting back through the mist of centuries to a world of quiet cloisters and moonlit ramparts. It was a time when the most precious things in the world were not kept in digital vaults, but in iron-bound chests and gold-leafed shrines. We are going to explore the hushed, forgotten corners of history, the strange and subtle deceptions that occurred when the world was asleep. We will follow the trail of whispers and missing shadows, looking into the artful heists and curious thefts of relics that once stirred the quiet hearts of the Middle Ages. But there is no need to hurry. We have all the time in the world to let the story unfold. As slow and inevitable as the moon's progress across the ink-black sky, close your eyes and imagine the Abbey of Saint, nestled in a fold of the French countryside. The stone walls of the abbey are thick, grey and weathered, standing as a silent sentinel against the encroaching forest. It is autumn, and the air smells of damp earth, fallen leaves, and the lingering smoke of peat fires. Inside the scriptorium, the atmosphere is one of profound, focused peace. The monks have long since retired to their cells, leaving behind the heavy oak desks where they spend their daylight hours, painstakingly copying the wisdom of the ages onto sheets of vellum. The room is cold now, the ink pots capped, the quills resting in their holders like sleeping birds. A single lantern hangs from a central pillar, casting a dim golden glow that barely reaches the corners of the vast room. In the center of the scriptorium, resting upon a velvet-lined lectern, lies the Codex Aureus. It is a book of such immense beauty and value that it is said to have been touched by the hands of angels. Its cover is encrusted with cabochon emeralds and deep red garnets, and the parchment within is dyed a royal purple, inscribed with letters of pure gold. During the day, it is the heart of the abbey's devotion, a shimmering testament to faith and patience. But tonight, it sits in the darkness, a heavy, silent weight of history and gold. The rhythm of life in St. Sulpice is as steady as the heartbeat of the earth. Wake at dawn, pray, work, eat in silence, pray again, and sleep. It is a cycle that has remained unchanged for hundreds of years, a loop of devotion that feels as though it could never be broken. The monks know every stone of this place, every creak of the floorboards, every draught that whistles through the high windows. They move through the corridors like shadows, their movements economical and practiced. As the night deepens, the silence becomes even more pronounced. The wind outside has died down to a mere sigh against the buttresses. Inside the abbey, the only sound is the occasional pop of a cooling ember in the kitchen hearth far below. Brother Thomas, the elderly keeper of the library, lies in his narrow cot in the dormitory. His breathing is thin and steady, a soft whistle in the dark. He spent his evening as he always does, meticulously checking the locks on the heavy iron grates that protect the abbey's treasures. He remembers the weight of the iron key in his hand, the way it turned with a familiar, satisfying clunk. Everything was as it should be. The codex was in its place. The gates were barred. The world was at rest. And yet, if one were to stand in the scriptorium at this very moment, there is a sensation, a subtle shift in the air that wasn't there during the Vesper service. It is not a sound, exactly. It is more like the absence of a sound that should be there. The way a forest feels just before a storm, or the way the surface of a pond holds its breath before a pebble breaks the glass. The shadows in the corners of the room seem a fraction longer than they were an hour ago. The golden light of the lantern flickers, not from a draught, but as if the flame itself is blinking in a moment of uncertainty. There is a particular scent in the scriptorium tonight that is slightly out of place. It is not the usual smell of old parchment and dried ink. It is something fainter, sharper, the smell of wet wool and wood smoke from a fire that wasn't lit in the abbey. It lingers near the floor, moving slowly through the aisles of desks. On the surface of the Codex Aureus, a single bead of condensation has formed on one of the large emeralds, reflecting the dim lantern light like a tiny, watchful eye. The heavy oak doors of the scriptorium are closed and bolted from the inside, as they have been every night for decades. The windows are narrow slits, far too small for any man to pass through, set high up in the stone. To any observer, the room is a fortress of sanctity, but the silence is no longer heavy. It has become thin, stretched like a piece of overworked gold leaf. In the courtyard outside, the fountain continues its soft, repetitive splashing, but the rhythm seems to have faltered for a heartbeat, a tiny skip in the music of the night. A single owl, perched on the gargoyle of the bell tower, turns its head a full 180 degrees, its yellow eyes fixed on the darkened windows of the scriptorium. It sees nothing moving, yet it remains intensely alert. Back inside, near the base of the great lectern, a small pile of dust has been disturbed. It is a minute change, a tiny swirl in the grey coating of the floor, so slight that even the most diligent monk would not notice it by the light of the sun. But in the stillness of the night, it is a testament to a presence that has passed through the room. The codex itself seems to glow with a dull, internal light, the gold leaf on its cover catching the dying embers of the lantern. It is a masterwork of human effort, representing decades of labor by dozens of scribes. Each letter was formed with a prayer. Each illustration was a meditation. It is more than a book. It is a vessel of time. And yet, there is a strange tension in the way it sits upon the velvet. It feels less like a treasure and more like a lure. The shadows continue to stretch and crawl across the floor as the lantern oil slowly depletes. The flame gutters, casting long, wavering fingers of light toward the heavy doors. Somewhere in the distance, a floorboard creaks not, the sharp crack of a footstep, but the slow, groaning protest of old wood settling under the weight of the night. It is a sound that happens 1,000 times a night in an abbey this old, yet tonight it carries a different resonance. It sounds like a secret being whispered from one beam to another. The air grows colder, the dampness of the autumn night beginning to seep through the thick masonry. The silence returns, but it is no longer the peaceful silence of prayer. It is the watchful silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. The Codex Aureus remains on its lectern, beautiful and indifferent, its jewels staring blindly into the dark. But the lock on the iron grate, the one Brother Thomas checked so carefully, now bears a single hairline scratch near the keyhole, a silver line, so thin it is invisible to the naked eye. The seal of the abbey, waxen and red, remains unbroken on the main door. Yet the atmosphere in the room has shifted irrevocably. The sanctity of the scriptorium has been breached, not by force, but by a presence as quiet as the falling snow. As the first hint of grey begins to touch the eastern horizon, far beyond the abbey walls, the scriptorium remains plunged in its deep, artificial twilight. The monks will soon be rising for the first prayers of the day, their feet shuffling softly down the stone corridors. They will come to this room to begin their work, expecting to find everything exactly as they left it. They will trust in the walls, the locks, and the weight of their own tradition. They do not know that the world outside has already reached in and touched their most sacred treasure. They do not know that the story of the Codex has taken a turn, moving away from the light of the altar and into the long, winding shadows of the unknown. The bells will soon begin to ring, their bronze voices calling out across the mist-covered fields, signaling the start of another day of labor and faith. But for now, the abbey remains trapped in that final, deepest hour of the night, where the boundaries between the real and the imagined are at their thinnest. The Codex Aureus sits in the center of the room, a silent witness to a crime that has not yet been discovered, a heist that required no broken glass or shouted threats, only the patience of the shadows and the slow, steady pulse of a medieval night. The candle in the lantern finally flickers out, leaving the room in total darkness, save for the faint, ghostly outline of the emeralds on the cover, glowing like distant stars in a cold, silent sky. The first bell of the morning, the heavy bronze bell known as the Singer, begins to stir the air. Its sound is not a sharp alarm, but a deep, vibrating hum that seems to travel through the stone floor itself, rising up through the soles of the feet before it reaches the ears. The mist outside the abbey windows is thick and milky, pressing against the glass like a soft, damp hand. In the dormitory, the monks rise with a synchronized rustle of coarse wool and the soft thud of bare feet on timber. There is no talking. The rule of silence still holds the morning in its grip. Brother Thomas, his joints aching with the damp cold of the changing season, moves with a slow, practiced grace. He lights a small hand candle from the wall sconce, the tiny flame dancing in the draught of the corridor as he makes his way toward the scriptorium. His footsteps are a rhythmic slap hush against the flagstones, a sound that has defined his life for 50 years. He reaches the great oak doors and feels for the heavy iron key at his belt. It is cold, nearly freezing, and as he slides it into the lock, the metal sings a high, lonely note. The bolt slides back with its usual resistance, a familiar weight that tells him the world is as it should be. He pushes the door open. The air inside the scriptorium is stale and smells of old winter. He moves toward the central lectern, his eyes downcast as a sign of humility, his mind already reciting the morning psalms. He reaches out a withered hand to touch the velvet edge of the lectern, a small ritual of grounding he performs every day before the other scribes arrive. But as his fingers trail over the fabric, they do not meet the expected resistance of the heavy, jewel-encrusted cover. Instead, they find only the soft, yielding pile of the velvet. Thomas stops. He does not gasp. He does not cry out. He simply stands still, his breath hitching slightly in his chest, creating a tiny cloud of white vapor in the dim light. He raises his candle, the flame trembling just enough to cast long, erratic shadows across the room. The lectern is empty. The Codex Aureus, the work of a century, the pride of the province, is gone. There is no shattered glass. There are no overturned stools or signs of a struggle. The room looks exactly as it did the night before, save for that one profound absence. It is as if the book has simply dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of wet wool and the cold, indifferent air. Thomas walks a slow circle around the lectern, his candle illuminating the floor. He notices a small, pale smear on the dark wood of a nearby desker, tiny drop of tallow, whiter and purer than the yellow beeswax used by the abbey. It sits there like a fallen star, perfectly round and cold. A few feet away, Brother Antoine, a younger scribe with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual squint, enters the room. He pauses at the threshold, sensing the break in the morning's rhythm. He sees Thomas standing by the empty lectern, the old man's shoulders slightly slumped, his head tilted as if listening for a sound that isn't there. Antoine approaches slowly, his footsteps echoing softly. He looks at the empty velvet, then at Thomas, then back at the empty space where the gold and jewels should be reflecting the candlelight. The light has not hit it yet, Antoine whispers, his voice cracking from the morning's disuse. He speaks not as if the book is stolen, but as if it is merely hiding in the gloom. Thomas does not answer immediately. He leans down, his knees popping in the silence, to examine the iron grate. The lock is closed. The bars are straight. He reaches out to touch the cold metal, and his thumb brushes against that microscopic scratch near the keyhole. Though in the flickering light, he perceives it only as a trick of the shadow. The two men stand there in the vast, cold room, two small figures dwarfed by the towering shelves of silent books. They do not run for the abbot. They do not sound the alarm. To do so would feel like a violation of the morning's peace, a jagged tear in the fabric of their devotion. Instead, they begin to move through the scriptorium with a quiet, mounting confusion. They check the undershelves. They look behind the heavy curtains that shield the vellum from the sun. They move with a slow, dreamlike quality, as if they expect the codex to reappear if they only look in the right way. With enough patience, the sun begins to burn through the mist outside, and a single, pale beam of light filters through the high, eastern slit window. It travels slowly across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, until it lands directly on the empty lectern. The red velvet glows a deep, bruised crimson in the sunlight. In the center of the stand, where the heaviest part of the book once rested, there is a slight indentation in the fabric, a ghost of the weight that is no longer there. Antoine reaches out and touches the indentation, his fingers tracing the curve where the spine used to sit. He notices something then, a detail so small it would be missed by anyone in a hurry. Tucked into the crease of the velvet is a single, tiny feather. It is not the brown feather of a local owl or the grey of a pigeon. It is a brilliant, iridescent blue, a colour that does not belong in this grey stone world. It shimmers with an unnatural light, even in the weak morning sun. Thomas joins him, looking down at the feather. He thinks of the merchants who come from the far south, the men who speak of lands where the birds are the colour of jewels and the sun never hides behind the clouds. He thinks of the subtle art of the substitution, a tale he heard as a novice how a clever thief might replace a heavy object with something of equal weight for just long enough to escape the building, using bags of sand or lead that are later discarded. But there are no bags of sand here. There is only the silence, the empty lectern, and this single, exotic blue feather. The rest of the abbey is beginning to wake now. The sound of many footsteps can be heard in the cloister, a low, rhythmic thrumming like a distant tide. The morning light is growing stronger, revealing the cracks in the floor and the cobwebs in the rafters. But it reveals no path, no broken window, no clue as to how the treasure walked through walls. The two monks remain by the lectern, their shadows stretching out behind them. They are waiting for the world to make sense again, for the abbot to arrive and tell them that the book was moved for cleaning, or that it was taken to the chapel in the middle of the night for a private devotion they knew nothing about. But in their hearts, they feel a cold, creeping certainty. The abbey has been breathed upon by something from the outside, something that moves with the silence of a shadow and the precision of a master artisan. The theft was not an act of violence. It was an act of translation, a shifting of an object from one reality to another, without disturbing the dust on the floor. Thomas looks at the heavy iron key still hanging from his belt, then back at the blue feather resting on the red velvet. He wonders, with a slow and heavy heart, if the locks were ever really there at all, or if they were merely an illusion of safety they had all agreed to believe in. The bells begin to ring for prime, their sound more insistent now, calling the brothers to the chapel. Thomas and Antoine look at each other, the same unspoken question hanging in the air between them. If the gold is gone and the doors are still locked, what else might have been taken while they were dreaming? The bells for prime continue to pulse through the stone, a heavy, rhythmic reminder of a world that demands order, even as the center of that order has quietly vanished. Brother Thomas does not move toward the chapel. Instead, he gestures for Antoine to go, a flick of his wrist that is as silent as the dust. He needs the stillness. He needs to walk the path the shadow took, though his old legs feel heavy, as if the very air of the scriptorium has turned to water. He begins at the heavy oak doors, running his calloused thumb over the grain of the wood. In this age, crime is often seen not merely as a theft of property, but as a disturbance of the divine harmony. To steal a holy book is to invite a tear in the fabric of the protection the saints provide. Thomas wonders if a man truly did this, or if the sins of the abbey had simply reached a weight where the earth itself opened to swallow the gold. He moves into the corridor, his candle a small, defiant spark against the greying light of the morning. The corridors of St. Sulpice are narrow and rib-vaulted, designed to funnel the sound of chanting but also to keep the heat of the summer out and the chill of the winter in. He walks toward the north transept, where the stone is always dampest. He stops at a small wooden door that leads to the storage cellars, a place of salt pork, barrels of ale, and stacks of unspun wool. The air here is different. It smells of fermentation and the sharp, mineral tang of the earth. He notices that the heavy iron bolt on this door, usually red with a fine patina of rust, has been wiped clean in one small spot. A circle of bright silver metal peeks through the corrosion, no larger than a thumbprint. It is a sign of a hand that knew exactly where to press to keep the hinges from screaming. Thomas breathes out slowly, his mind drifting to the stories of the latrones, the professional thieves of the burgeoning cities, men who study the physics of a lock as a scholar studies a text. In the medieval mind, such skill is often indistinguishable from sorcery. He descends the 3 steps into the cellar. The darkness here is absolute, retreating only inches at a time as he moves his candle. He passes the great tuns of wine, their bellies swollen and silent. On the floor, near a ventilation slit that looks out onto the kitchen garden, he sees a trail of fine, white powder. He kneels, his habit bunching around his shins. He pinches a bit of the dust and tastes it. It is not salt. It is not flour. It is chalk, the fine, white chalk used by masons to mark stones, or perhaps by an illuminator to prepare vellum. But there has been no masonry work in this wing for 3 winters. He looks up at the slit window. It is barely 4 inches wide, a vertical wound in the 3-foot-thick wall. No man could pass through it, not even a child, and yet the chalk trail leads directly to the base of the wall beneath it, and then simply stops, as if the person carrying it had ascended the stone like a fly. Thomas stands and walks back up to the main level, his mind turning over the possibilities with the slow deliberation of a millstone. He thinks of the relic merchants who frequent the great fairs at St. Men who trade in the bones of martyrs and the wood of the true cross. They are a shadowy lot, blending the piety of a pilgrim with the greed of a usurer. Could one of them have subverted a brother? He thinks of the younger monks, those like Antoine, who have seen the world beyond the walls and perhaps find the silence of the abbey a burden rather than a blessing. But to steal the codex requires more than a willing heart. It requires a silence greater than the abbey's own. He moves toward the outer courtyard, crossing the threshold into the cool, misty air. The sun is a pale disk now, unable to burn away the fog that clings to the herb garden. The garden is a grid of medicinal plants, rosemary for memory, lavender for sleep, hyssop for the cleansing of the soul. Each bed is bordered by low stone walls. Thomas walks the perimeter, his eyes fixed on the ground. He is looking for a footprint, a broken stem, any sign of a clumsy exit. But the earth is undisturbed. The dew lies heavy and silver on the leaves, a perfect, unbroken carpet. He pauses by the well, the iron crank cold under his hand. He looks down into the black circle of the water, seeing only his own reflection, distorted and flickering. In this era, the law is a matter of compensation and penance. If a thief is caught, they might lose a hand or be forced to walk to Rome in chains. But how do you punish a shadow? How do you bring a ghost to the Count's court? He begins to walk back toward the scriptorium, his pace even slower now. He passes the kitchen, where the fire is being stoked for the morning pottage. The smell of wood smoke is thick here, masking that strange sharp scent he encountered in the night. He stops by a small, secondary entrance used by the lay brothers. The door is thick timber, reinforced with iron straps in the shape of crosses. As he reaches for the handle, his gaze falls on the stone doorframe. There, carved into the soft limestone at eye level, is a tiny mark that wasn't there yesterday. It is not a cross, nor is it the mark of a mason. It is a simple, elegant looper circle that doesn't quite close, with a small dot in the center. It looks like an eye, or perhaps a simplified map of the world. Thomas reaches out to touch the carving. The stone is still cold, but the edges of the mark are sharp, the dust from the carving still clinging to the grooves. It was made recently, perhaps only hours ago. He realizes then that the thief did not just take the book. They left a signature, a quiet boast etched into the very bones of the abbey. He looks back toward the scriptorium, then out toward the mist-shrouded gates of the monastery. For the first time in 50 years, the walls of St. Sulpice do not feel like a fortress. They feel like a sieve. He looks down at his hand, the one that touched the carving, and notices a faint, shimmering dust on his fingertips. It isn't the white chalk from the cellar. It is gold, a few microscopic flakes of the same gold leaf used in the Codex Aureus, glinting in the morning light like the scales of a fish. and then he sees it. A second blue feather snagged on a splinter of the door, moving gently in the breeze. But this time, the feather is not whole. It has been cut perfectly and precisely into the shape of a key. The sun continues its slow, golden climb over the stone crenellations of the abbey, and the mist in the valley begins to thin, revealing the patchwork of fields and the dark, tangled edges of the forest beyond. The bells for the morning meal ring out, a softer, more melodic tone that signifies the transition from prayer to the sustenance of the body. Brother Thomas stands by the small side door, his fingers still tracing the microscopic flakes of gold and the blue feather shaped like a key. He does not call for the guards, nor does he shout for the abbot. In the medieval world, silence is often the most profound response to a mystery. To speak of a theft is to give it a name, to make it real, and to admit that the sanctity of the walls has been pierced. He tucks the feather into the deep, warm fold of his sleeve, feeling the slight, dry tickle of it against his wrist. He decides, with the slow and heavy caution of the old, to walk through the daily motions as if the world was still whole. He turns away from the door and begins the long trek toward the refectory, his sandals whispering against the stone, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a tomb. The refectory is a vast, echoing hall where the light falls in long, dusty shafts from high arched windows. The air here smells of boiled oats, dried herbs, and the faint, sour temps of small ale. The brothers are already seated at the long trestle tables, their hoods pulled forward, their faces obscured in shadow. There is no talking. Instead, a young novice stands at a high stone pulpit, his voice thin and rhythmic as he reads from the lives of the saints. The words drift over the heads of the monks like a slow-flowing river, a constant stream of Latin that everyone knows by heart, a background hum to the clatter of wooden spoons against ceramic bowls. Thomas takes his seat at the end of the table, his bowl of pottage steaming before him. He watches the steam rise and curl, a miniature ghost dancing in the light. He looks at the hands of the men around him, hands that are stained with ink, hands calloused by the plough, hands scrubbed raw from the laundry. He wonders which of these hands might have held the gold of the codex only hours ago in this quiet community. Every man is a brother, yet every man is a stranger behind the veil of his own thoughts. The theft of a relic or a holy book in this age is rarely seen as a common crime of greed. It is often a matter of pious theft, the belief that a holy object wishes to be moved, that it has a will of its own and has chosen a new home where it will be more properly venerated. Perhaps, Thomas muses as he slowly stirs his oats, someone within these very walls believed the codex was being neglected, or that its beauty was a distraction from the true path of poverty. Or perhaps it was a misunderstanding of a different sort, a debt owed to a powerful patron, a silent agreement made in the dark of the confessional to ensure the abbey's continued protection. The politics of the soul are often as complex as the politics of the crown. He watches Brother Antoine across the table. The young scribe is not eating. He is staring at the grain of the wooden table, his thumbs rubbing together in a repetitive, nervous motion. Antoine's fingers are usually dark with the blue and black inks of the scriptorium, but today they look unnaturally clean, as if they have been scrubbed with lye. The meal ends as slowly as it began. The brothers rise in unison, a great wave of grey and brown wool, and file out toward their appointed tasks. Some go to the fields to gather the last of the hardy root vegetables before the frost sets in. Others go to the infirmary to tend the sick with poultices of comfrey and honey. Thomas returns to the scriptorium, But he does not go to his usual desk. Instead, he walks to the very back of the room, to the small, cramped carrel where the older, discarded manuscripts are kept, the ones with peeling paint and vellum that has turned yellow and brittle like an old man's skin. This part of the library is rarely visited. It smells of deep time and the slow, inevitable decay of leather. He begins to pull books from the shelves, not looking for their content, but for their weight. He remembers the theory of substitution he thought of earlier. If the codex was taken, something must have replaced it on the lectern for a time. Something heavy enough to keep the velvet from shifting. Something that wouldn't catch the light as he works. The routine of the abbey continues outside the door. He hears the distant, rhythmic thud of an axe in the woods, the bleating of sheep being driven to a lower pasture, and the occasional high-pitched laugh of a village child playing near the outer gates. These sounds are the heartbeat of the Middle Ages, slow, steady pulse that ignores the crises of the great and the powerful. To the farmer in the field, the loss of a gold book is a distant, abstract thing, less important than the health of a cow or the coming of the rain. Thomas feels a sudden, sharp pang of envy for that simplicity. He finds a heavy, iron-bound ledger from the previous century, its wooden boards thick and scarred. He carries it to the central lectern and places it down on the red velvet. It fits the indentation perfectly. He realizes with a cold shudder that the thief didn't just know the book. They knew the exact dimensions of its absence. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of intimacy. The afternoon sun begins to shift, casting the shadow of the great crucifix across the floor. Thomas sits on a low stool, his hands folded in his lap, letting his eyes wander over the stone walls. He notices the way the mortar has crumbled in certain spots, revealing the rough-hewn rubble beneath the smooth ashlar. The abbey, for all its grandeur, is a living thing, constantly shedding its skin, constantly being rebuilt. He thinks about the masons who lived here during the Great Construction, men who spent their entire lives carving a single pillar they would never see finished. They left their marks in hidden places, the underside of stairs, the tops of the highest capitals. He wonders if the mark he saw on the door, the unclosed circle with the dot, might be a mason's mark he had simply forgotten. But no, those marks are usually geometric, sharp, and purposeful. The mark on the door was different. It was fluid, almost like a letter from an unknown alphabet. He leaves the scriptorium and walks toward the cloister, the square heart of the monastery where the monks walk to meditate. The garden in the center of the cloister is a sea of dying ferns and dormant rose bushes. In the center stands a sundial, its bronze gnomon casting a long, thin shadow across the Roman numerals. Thomas watches the shadow move. It is so slow that the eye cannot see it shifting. Yet if he looks away for a minute and looks back, the time has changed. That is how the theft fills a slow movement of the world that happened while everyone was looking at the sun. He encounters the abbot in the cloister, a man of great girth and even greater gravity. The abbot's face is a map of hidden anxieties, his eyes constantly darting to the horizon as if expecting a messenger with bad news. He stops Thomas with a heavy hand on the shoulder. "The brothers tell me the scriptorium is cold today, Thomas," the abbot says, his voice a low rumble. "They say the air feels thin." Thomas looks into the abbot's eyes, searching for a sign of guilt, of knowledge, or of simple, honest confusion. "The seasons are turning," Father Thomas replies softly. "The earth is preparing for its sleep. Things often feel thin when the light begins to fail." The abbot nods slowly, his hand lingering on Thomas's shoulder. See that the candles are doubled tonight. We cannot have the brothers stumbling in the dark. The dark is where the mind wanders to places it should not go. The abbot moves on, his heavy robes sweeping the ground. Thomas stays by the sundial, watching the shadow reach the hour of nones. He realizes that the abbot did not ask about the codex. He did not ask if the morning's work was progressing. It is as if a silent agreement has already been reached, a collective decision to ignore the hole in the heart of the abbey until it can be filled with something else. This is the medieval way. To protect the institution, one must sometimes sacrifice the truth. If the loss of the gold book becomes a scandal, the bishop will come. If the bishop comes, the king's tax collectors will follow. It is better to have a silent, empty lectern than a loud, chaotic house. Thomas walks to the laundry, a low building near the stream that runs through the abbey grounds. The air here is thick with steam and the sharp smell of wood ash soap. Great vats of water bubble over peat fires, and the lay brothers stir the heavy wool garments with long wooden poles. Thomas looks at the drying lines, where rows of white tunics hang like a line of ghosts. He sees a brother scrubbing a pile of small linen bags, the kind used to hold grain or flour. One of the bags is stained with a brilliant, deep indigo, a color so rich it seems to vibrate against the white fabric. Indigo is a rare dye, expensive and hard to come by, used primarily by the master illustrators in the scriptorium to create the deep blues of the Virgin's robes. Why would a grain bag be stained with the ink of a master? He walks closer, his heart fluttering like a bird in a cage. The brother doing the washing is a simple man, a mute who has lived at the abbey since he was a child. He looks up at Thomas with wide, innocent eyes and smiles, holding up the blue-stained bag as if it were a beautiful flower. He mimes the action of pouring, then points toward the woods beyond the wall. Thomas reaches out and takes the bag. The violet light that had momentarily filled the scriptorium fades into a memory, so fragile it feels as though it might shatter if Thomas breathes too deeply. He stands in the absolute darkness, his hand still resting on the cold iron ring of the door, listening to the heavy, rhythmic silence of the abbey. There is no sound of a quill now, no rustle of parchment, only the distant, muffled lowing of a cow in the stable and the faint, persistent drip of rainwater from a lead gutter. He does not strike a light. Instead, he turns away from the room, his mind clouding with the realization that the walls of St. Vulpes, once his entire universe, have become too small to hold the truth of what has transpired. The next morning, as the sun begins to bleed a pale watery gold through the canopy of the ancient oaks, Thomas does something he has not done in 20 years. He seeks permission from the abbot to travel. He claims a need to consult the archives at the sister house of Valdegris, a day's journey to the east, citing a discrepancy in the lineage of a minor saint. The abbot, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming tithe collections and the growing damp in the granary, grants the request with a distracted wave of a ringed hand. Thomas sets out on foot, carrying only a small leather satchel containing a heel of hard bread, a rind of cheese, and the blue feather tucked deep within his wooden prayer beads. The road is not the paved, straight line of the modern imagination, but a winding, narrow track of packed earth and pulverized limestone, hemmed in by hedgerows of hawthorn and blackberry. The pace of travel in this world is the pace of the human heart. Each step is a deliberate interaction with the land. He walks slowly, his wooden staff clicking softly against the occasional stray flint, his eyes downcast as he watches the play of light on the puddles left by the night's rain. The air is crisp and carries the scent of wood smoke from distant farmsteads and the sharp, clean smell of pine needles. To travel in the Middle Ages is to move through a landscape that is intensely alive, where every stream has a name and every hollow in the woods is said to be the home of something older than the church. He passes a stonebreaker sitting by the side of the road, a man whose life is measured in the rhythmic tink-tink of a small hammer against grey rock. They exchange a silent nod, a slow acknowledgement of two souls moving through time at the same measured speed. As the morning matures into a still, hazy afternoon, the landscape begins to open up. The dense forests give way to rolling hills of stubble-gold wheat fields, recently harvested and waiting for the winter plough. In the distance, the spires of a market town rise above the mist like the masts of a sunken ship. This is a place of trade and transit, where the quiet sanctity of the monastery meets the bustling, sensory world of the merchant. Thomas feels the shift in the atmosphere before he even reaches the town gates. The air grows heavier with the smell of roasting meat, wet wool, and the earthy musk of livestock. He approaches the gates, where the guards sit on wooden stools, their leather jerkins stained with sweat, their pikes leaning lazily against the stone archway. They do not challenge him. A monk in a travel-worn habit is a common sight, a part of the natural order of the road. He enters the town of Oakhaven, where the streets are narrow and overshadowed by timber-framed houses that lean toward each other like gossiping neighbors. The ground is a patchwork of mud and cobblestones, and the sound of life here is a constant, low-frequency hum. Blacksmiths work their bellows with a slow, sighing breath. Weavers pass shuttles through looms with a rhythmic clack-clack, and the calls of the street vendors are melodic, almost like a secular plainchant. Thomas moves through the crowd like a ghost, his presence barely noted. He is heading for the Guild of Illuminators, a small, discreet building tucked behind the shadow of the local cathedral. In this era, art is not a solitary pursuit of the ego, but a collective labor of the spirit. A book like the Codex Aureus is a confluence of 100 different lives: the miner who dug the cinnabar, the merchant who crossed the desert with the lapis lazuli, the artisan who beat the gold into leaves so thin they would float on a sigh. The guild hall is quiet, the air inside cool and smelling of boiled linseed oil and vinegar. A master artisan, a man named Elian, with spectacles perched on the end of a long, thin nose, is seated at a bench, meticulously grinding a piece of malachite into a fine, green powder. The sound of the pestle against the stone mortar is a dry, repetitive rasp. Thomas approaches and stands in silence, waiting for the artisan to reach a natural breaking point in his work. In this world, to interrupt a man at his craft is a minor sin against the work itself. Finally, Elian looks up, his eyes magnified and watery behind the glass. "You have the look of a man who has lost a word and travelled 20 miles to find it," Elian says. His voice as dry as the powder on his bench. Thomas reaches into his sleeve and produces the indigo-stained linen bag he found at the laundry. He lays it on the workbench next to the malachite. Elian does not pick it up. He leans in, sniffing the air, then runs a finger over the deep blue stain. He stays like that for a long time, his face a mask of professional contemplation. "This is not the indigo of the markets," he says finally. "This is a blue that has been sung to. It is the ultramarine of the eastern coast, but it has been tempered with something I have not seen in 40 years of grinding. It has the shimmer of the deep sea, yet it stays flat on the eye. It is the work of the master of the blue key." Thomas feels a chill that has nothing to do with the draft in the guild hall. the master of the blue key. I have not heard that name in the chronicles. Elian resumes his grinding, the rasp-rasp of the pestle filling the silence. You would not. He was a man who believed that the true beauty of a book lay not in its display, but in its potential to vanish. He spoke of the art of the shadow, where a masterpiece is only complete when it returns to the elements from which it was borrowed. They say he once painted a cathedral ceiling in a remote mountain valley using pigments that would only appear during a full moon, and even then, only to those who were fasting. He was a thief of sorts, but he did not steal for gold. He stole to restore the balance of the world. He believed that too much beauty in one place would make the earth heavy and cause the stars to stumble. Thomas listens, the words sinking into him like stones in a pond. He thinks of the empty lectern, the blue feather, and the figure he saw in the violet light. Where would such a man go? He asks softly. Elian points toward the cathedral, whose great north door is currently being repaired. They say he left a trail in the light itself. If you wish to find where the gold has gone, you must look at the things that have no value. Look at the glass, monk, not the colored glass of the kings, but the clear glass of the poor. Thomas leaves the Guildhall and walks toward the cathedral. The sun is beginning to dip, casting long orange fingers through the streets. He enters the vast, cool interior of the church, where the air is thick with the scent of frankincense and the cold breath of the crypt. He moves past the ornate altars and the tombs of the Crusaders, heading for the humble chapel of St. Jude in the far corner. Here, the windows are not filled with the glorious red and blue narratives of the Bible, but with simple, diamond-shaped panes of untinted glass. He sits on a wooden bench, his staff resting between his knees, and waits for the sun to hit the correct angle as the light begins to fail. A single ray of the setting sun strikes one of the clear panes. The glass is old and full of imperfections, tiny bubbles and ripples that distort the light. But as the beam passes through, it does not merely brighten the floor. It creates a projection on the opposite stone wall. It is a map, drawn in light and shadow, formed by the very flaws in the glass. It shows a winding river, a bridge with 3 arches, and a small, lonely tower on a hill. And there, at the very center of the projected map, is a tiny, shimmering dot of gold, a single flake of leaf that has been embedded inside the glass itself. Thomas leans forward, his heart slowing to a steady, heavy beat. He realizes that the thief did not just take the book. He transformed it into a guide. The gold from the cover of the codex was not stolen to be sold. It was being used to mark a path. He looks at the map on the wall, memorizing the curves of the river and the position of the tower. It is a place he recognizes from his youth, a forgotten hermitage in the marshes of the Grey Wash. A place where the water meets the sky and the lines between the worlds are said to be thin. He realizes that the theft was not a conclusion, but an invitation. The codex was not missing. It was being moved to a location where its gold could catch the light of a different world. He stands up, his shadow stretching out across the cathedral floor until it touches the far wall. The map of light begins to fade as the sun sinks below the horizon, the gold dot winking out like a dying star. The cathedral returns to its grey, twilight silence. Thomas feels a strange, quiet peace settle over him. The urgency of the crime has vanished, replaced by the slow, inevitable pull of a journey that was ordained long before he was born. He turns toward the door, his mind already calculating the distance to the Grey Wash. He will walk there as he walked here, slowly, one step at a time, watching the world breathe. the town of Oakhaven begins to pull its shutters closed. The sound of wooden bolts sliding into place echoing like the heavy heartbeats of a giant settling into sleep. Brother Thomas moves toward the eastern gate, but his pace is not that of a man in pursuit. It is the pace of a man following a river's flow, patient and inevitable. The damp evening air clings to his wool habit, making it heavy and cool against his skin. As he walks, he turns the small wooden bird over in his fingers, feeling the slight tackiness of the blue paint. In the medieval mind, objects are never just objects. They are witnesses, vessels of intent, and anchors for the soul. To Thomas, this toy is a whisper from the master of the blue key, a silent breadcrumb left in the wake of a ghost. He steps beyond the stone archway of the town, leaving the smell of peat smoke and livestock behind for the vast open silence of the marshlands. The road here is less a road and more a suggestion of dry land, a ribbon of crushed shell and grey silt that winds between pools of standing water. The moon has not yet risen, and the world is a study in charcoal and silver dot far ahead. Where the grey wash meets the horizon, a second figure moves with the same rhythmic deliberation. This is a woman named Isabeau, though in the ledgers of the local lords she does not exist. She is a gleaner of shadows, a person who lives in the interstitial spaces of the feudal world. She stands on the bridge with 3 arches, the very one Thomas saw projected in light upon the cathedral wall. Isabeau is not a thief of greed, nor is she a woman of the cloth, yet she understands the Codex Aureus better than any monk who ever spent a decade illuminating its margins. She watches the water swirl around the mossy stone piers of the bridge, the ripples catching the faint starlight. In her hands, she holds a small leather pouch filled with the very same blue pigment Eliane described the ground lapis, the honey, the secret binders of the East. Her motive is not the coins the emeralds on the book's cover would fetch. In her world, gold is a heavy, dangerous burden that draws the eyes of the hungry and the cruel. No, her devotion is to the preservation of the ephemeral in this age. The great houses and the grand abbeys believe that to own a thing is to keep it forever. But Isabeau knows that stone crumbles and iron rusts. She believes that for a holy thing to truly live, it must occasionally be unmade and scattered like seeds in a field. She looks back toward the lonely tower on the hill, a silhouette of crumbling flint and ivy that has stood since the time of the Romans. It is there that the Codex now rests, but it is no longer a book. Under her careful, steady hands, and the hands of the one Thomas calls the Master, the Codex is being disassembled. They are not destroying it. They are translating it into the landscape. The emeralds have been pressed into the deep, wet moss of the marsh where only the herons will see them shine. The gold leaf is being ground down and mixed with the morning mist, to be painted onto the wings of the dragonflies and the undersides of the willow leaves. Isabeau reflects on the nature of value, as she waits for the old monk to draw nearer. To the abbot, the value was in the prestige of the object, the way it announced the abbey's wealth to the travelling bishops. To the king, the value would be in the raw weight of the metal. But to Isabeau, the value of the Codex Aureus was the way its beauty could be used to wake up a sleeping world. If the gold is trapped between 2 leather covers in a dark room, it is dead. If it is scattered into the air, it becomes a part of the light that wakes the farmer and guides the traveller. This is a theft of liberation, a quiet insurrection of the aesthetic. She hears the distant, rhythmic thumb-tap of Thomas's staff against the hard silt. She does not hide. In this slow-motion world, there is no need for ambush. She simply waits. her breathing synchronized with the sighing of the reeds in the wind. Thomas reaches the bridge an hour before midnight. His legs are weary, and the cold has seeped into his marrow, but his mind is remarkably clear. He sees the woman standing in the center of the middle arch, her silhouette framed by the stars. He stops 10 paces away, his staff planted firmly. He does not demand the return of the treasure. He does not threaten her with the wrath of God. He simply watches her, noticing the way she holds the pouch of blue pigment as if it were a prayer book. The light in the cathedral was very precise, Thomas says, his voice a soft rasp in the darkness. It took a great deal of patience to align the glass just so. Isabeau turns her head slightly, her face a pale oval in the gloom. Patience is the only thing we truly own, brother. The master says that if you give a man a book, he will read it once and forget it. But if you give him a mystery, he will carry it in his heart until he dies. We did not take your book to deprive you. We took it to make you walk this road. Thomas moves closer, leaning against the cold stone parapet of the bridge. He looks down at the water, seeing the reflection of the stars dancing in the current. The abbot will send men, he says gently. They will not understand the art of the shadow. They will only see the empty space on the shelf. The empty space is also a gift, Isabeau replies. It is a room that can now be filled with something new. Your abbey has been a fortress of many centuries, Thomas. But even a fortress needs to breathe. Look at the water. She reaches into her pouch and takes a pinch of the blue dust, letting it fall from her fingers into the river. For a second, as the powder hits the surface, the water ignites with a soft, bioluminescent glow. The blue spreads in a swirling ribbon, following the current under the bridge and out toward the marshes. It is the same blue as the feather, the same blue as the toy bird, the same blue as the Virgin's cloak in the scriptorium. Thomas watches it go, a streak of impossible color in the black night. He realizes then that the master of the blue key is not a person so much as a philosopher, way of seeing the world where nothing is ever truly lost, only moved. He thinks of his life in the monastery, the thousands of hours spent in the dim light, the thousands of words copied with meticulous care. He had always thought he was preserving the light, but standing here on the bridge, he sees that he was merely hoarding it. The realization is not painful. It is a slow, warming sensation, like a swallow of wine on a cold day. He reaches into his satchel and pulls out the wooden bird the child gave him. He places it on the stone wall of the bridge, letting it sit between him and the woman. Why the tower? He asks, why lead me there? Because the tower is where the wind is strongest, she says. And the wind is the only scribe that can reach everyone at once. They stand in silence for a long time. Two figures from different worlds brought together by a shared understanding of a beautiful crime. There is no greed here, no desperation. Even the survival they seek is not of the body, but of the wonder that the world so easily forgets. The medieval landscape around them feels infinite and heavy with secrets. In the distance, the lonely tower seems to pulse with a faint internal light, as if it were a hearth-fire for the entire valley. Thomas realizes that he does not want to go back to the abbey, at least not yet. He wants to see the end of the translation. He wants to see how a book of gold becomes a landscape of light. He thinks about the nature of crime. In the eyes of the law, what Isabeau and the master are doing is a sacrilege, a theft of the highest order. But in the eyes of the soul, is it a crime to return a diamond to the earth? Is it a theft to give the gold back to the sun? He reflects on the saints he has spent his life studying. Many of them were outcasts, people who broke the rules of men to follow a law that was written in the stars. He sees Isabeau's hands, they are stained with the blue of the sky, just as his were once stained with the ink of the cell. They are both scribes, in their own way. One writes on parchment, the other writes on the world. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of salt from the distant sea and the cold, mineral smell of the marshes. Isabeau begins to walk toward the tower, her movements fluid and silent. She does not invite him to follow, but she does not close the way. Thomas takes a breath, his lungs filling with the sharp, clean air. He picks up his staff and his satchel, but he leaves the wooden bird on the bridge, a small, blue-winged sentinel marking the place where his old life ended and his new understanding began. He follows her, his footsteps falling into the rhythm of her own, a slow and steady beat in the heart of the medieval night. As they walk, the stars above seem to grow brighter. Or perhaps it is just that Thomas's eyes have finally adjusted to the depth of the darkness. He notices that the mud of the path is shimmering with tiny golden flakes of leaf that have fallen from Isabeau's clothing or been carried by the breeze from the tower. He realizes that the path was never hidden. It was just that he had been looking for a book, while the truth was being written in the dirt beneath his feet. He feels a quiet, profound sense of relief. The Codex Aureus is gone, but the world has become a golden book in its place. Every leaf, every ripple in the water, every breath of wind is a letter in a language he is only just beginning to learn how to read. The interior of the hollow tower is a cathedral of air, where the stone walls seem to pull the starlight down into the center of the earth. Brother Thomas sits on his low, jagged perch of flint, his breathing slowing until it matches the long, rhythmic sighs of the wind moving through the ivy. The master, whose presence is less like a man and more like a quiet extension of the shadow, does not move from his seat. Between them, the suspended pages of the Codex Aureus continue their slow, ethereal dance, turning on their invisible threads like the petals of a great celestial flower. The gold leaf on the vellum catches the dim light, throwing tiny, dancing sparks against the rough masonry. It is a sight that would have struck terror into the heart of the Abeta king's ransom, hanging in the draft of a ruin, but to Thomas, it feels like the only honest way a book has ever been read. He looks at the master, whose hands are resting on his knees, palms upward, as if waiting for the sky to drop a secret into them. There is no tension here, no smell of sulfur or sorcery, only the deep, clean scent of crushed herbs and the ancient, cold damp of the stone. "You knew I would come," Thomas says, his voice so quiet it is almost lost to the rustle of the parchment. He does not ask a question. He simply states a truth that has been ripening in his mind since he first saw the blue feather on the lectern. The master turns his head, his movement so slow it seems to take a minute for his gaze to meet Thomas's. His eyes do not flash with the violet light now. They are a deep, weathered grey, like the surface of a mountain lake before a storm. "The path was already in you, brother," the master replies, his voice a low hum that vibrates in the stone. "The book was merely the map you needed to remember how to walk." A man who spends his life copying the words of others eventually forgets the sound of his own heart. We did not steal the gold. We invited it to breathe. Can you not feel it? The weight that has left the abbey, the lightness that has entered this valley. Thomas looks up at a page floating just above his head. It is the leaf that contains the beginning of the Gospel of John in Principia Arat. The gold eye is encrusted with microscopic shards of river pearl that Thomas himself had helped set 20 years ago. He remembers the cramped muscles in his neck, the stinging of his eyes under the tallow candle, the sheer, crushing responsibility of not marring the perfection of the page. He remembers feeling that if he failed, the world itself would be diminished. But now, seeing the page swaying in the night air, he sees that the perfection was not in the ink or the gold, but in the intention. The page is beautiful not because it is guarded, but because it is vulnerable. He reaches out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering just inches from the vellum. He expects the master to stop him, to pull the treasure away. But the man remains motionless, a silhouette of profound indifference. "I spent my life believing that the walls were what kept the light safe," Thomas whispers, more to himself than to his companion. "I thought the locks were a service to God, but the locks were for us, weren't they? To make us feel that we possessed something that cannot be owned." Isabeau appears in the archway, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. She carries a small earthenware bowl filled with clear water from the marsh. She walks to the center of the tower and places the bowl on a flat stone beneath the hanging pages. The reflection of the gold letters shimmers on the surface of the water, creating a secondary book, one made of ripples and light. She looks at Thomas, her expression one of gentle, weary compassion. In the medieval world, the line between the holy and the profane is often as thin as a single strand of silk. To a commoner, a miracle is just a truth they haven't seen before. To a monk, a mystery is a truth they are afraid to touch. "The abbot is a good man," Isabeau says softly, her voice melodic and steady. "But he is a man of gravity. He believes that for a thing to be holy, it must be heavy. He wanted the codex to be the anchor for the abbey, to keep it from drifting away into the poverty of the spirit. But an anchor that is too heavy will eventually drown the ship. We are simply cutting the rope, Thomas. We are letting the abbey float again." She dips a small brush made of squirrel hair into the water and touches it to the edge of the floating page. A single drop of water clings to the vellum, catching a fleck of gold. She then brings the brush down to the bowl, washing the gold into the water. Thomas watches, fascinated and horrified, as the material wealth of his order is systematically dissolved into a bowl of marsh water. It is a slow, methodical process, not a destruction, but a dilution. They are turning the book into a liquid, a substance that can be poured into the earth, drunk by the birds, and absorbed by the roots of the trees. Where will it go? Thomas asks, his heart beating with a strange, expectant rhythm. When all the pages are washed clean, and the gold is in the water, what becomes of the word? The master stands up, his tall frame nearly touching the lowest of the hanging pages. He moves with a grace that defies his apparent age, stepping toward the bowl. "The word does not live in the gold, Thomas. You know this. The gold is just the clothing. When the clothing is gone, the word returns to the silence from which it came, and the silence is everywhere. It is in the mist you walked through. It is in the bread you ate in Oak Haven. It is in the breath you are taking right now." He picks up the bowl and holds it out toward Thomas. The water inside is no longer clear. It is a swirling, incandescent cloud of gold and indigo, a liquid galaxy contained in a humble piece of clay. Thomas looks into the bowl and sees the history of his life reflected there, the cold mornings, the silent meals, the long nights of labor. He sees the faces of the brothers, the stern brow of the abbot, and the ink-stained fingers of Antoine. He realizes that they were all looking for the same thing, but they were looking at the cover, while the master and Isabeau were looking at the light that passed through the pages. "Drink," the master says. Thomas hesitates. To drink, this would be the final, irrevocable act of heresy. it would be to consume the very treasure he was sworn to protect. He thinks of the abbey, the heavy stone walls, and the empty lectern. He thinks of the blue feather shaped like a key. He understands now that the key was never meant to open a door in the monastery. It was meant to open a door in him. He takes the bowl from the master's hands. It is surprisingly heavy, the clay cool and damp. He raises it to his lips. The water tastes of nothing and everything, of rain, of stone, of the metallic temps of the stars. As he swallows, he feels a warmth spread through his chest, a slow, radiant glow that seems to dissolve the knots of age and doubt in his spirit. He sets the bowl down, his hands trembling no longer. He looks up at the pages, and for a moment the letters seem to lift off the vellum, hovering in the air like a swarm of golden bees. The scriptorium, the locks, the laws of the province, they all seem like a dream he had a long time ago. He is no longer Brother Thomas, the librarian. He is simply a man standing in a tower at the edge of the world, watching the gold return to the source. But as the warmth in his chest settles into a steady, quiet hum, a new thought enters his mind, a realization that is not yet a certainty, but a haunting, beautiful possibility. He looks at Isabeau, then at the master. He notices for the first time that the master's robe, while tattered and stained with the earth, is made of a fabric that Thomas recognizes. It is a specific, heavy weave of wool, dyed with a particular lye that is only used in the laundry of saints. And on the master's left hand, partially hidden by the long sleeve, is a small, puckered scar, the exact same scar that Brother Thomas saw on the hand of the previous abbot, a man who was said to have died in his sleep 40 years ago. On the very night the Codex Aureus was first brought to the abbey, the air in the tower grows suddenly still, the rustling of the pages ceasing as if the wind itself is holding its breath. Thomas feels a prickle of cold sweat on his neck. He looks at the master's face again, searching the grey eyes for a sign of the man he once knew, the man who had taught him his first Latin verbs and shown him how to hold a quill. The master does not look away. He gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of recognition that bridges for decades of silence. The records said you were buried in the crypt, Thomas says, his voice a mere thread of sound. I helped carry the stone. The master smiles, and it is a smile of such profound, mischievous joy that Thomas feels his breath catch. A stone is a very easy thing to move, Thomas, if you have enough shadows to help you. And a grave is a very quiet place to wait until the world is ready to see the light again. Isabeau steps forward and touches the master's arm, a gesture of deep familiarity. The dawn is coming, she says, her eyes fixed on the eastern archway where the sky is beginning to turn the color of a bruised plum. The first light will hit the bowl, and the work will be finished. Thomas stands there, caught between the world he knew and the revelation that is unfolding before him. If the master is who Thomas thinks he is, then the theft was not a crime committed by an outsider, but a long-planned homecoming. It was a secret kept for 40 years, a slow-burning fuse that had finally reached its end. But why? Why wait so long? Why involve him? He looks at the liquid gold in the bowl, which is now beginning to glow with an internal radiance as the first, faint hint of morning touches the sky. The light of the rising sun is not a sudden intrusion, but a gradual, honey-colored seeping through the jagged gaps of the tower's flint and mortar walls. Brother Thomas stands in the center of the ruin, his shadow a long thin needle pointing back toward the world he once knew. The suspended pages of the Codex Aureus, now as white as the wings of a dove, and entirely devoid of their gold and indigo finery. Sway in a morning breeze the smells of salt and waking earth. There is no scent of ozone, no lingering heat of magic. There is only the profound, heavy stillness of a task completed. Thomas looks down at the earthenware bowl. The liquid light that had briefly geysered within it has settled into a calm, dark surface, reflecting nothing but the square of blue sky above. He reaches out and touches the rim of the bowl. It is no longer cold stone. It feels alive, vibrating with a low frequency that he can feel in the marrow of his teeth. He looks toward the archway where the master and Isabeau had stood, but the mist has swallowed them whole, leaving behind only the damp, mossy footprints of a memory. He realizes now, with a clarity that only the dawn can provide, that he was never chasing a thief. He was participating in a funeral, the slow, beautiful burial of an idol in the medieval mind. The greatest sin is often not the breaking of a law, but the hardening of the heart. Thomas sits back down on the fallen stones, his staff resting across his knees, and begins to piece together the quiet truth of the theft. He remembers the old abbot man the master claimed to be, and the way he used to look at the codex with a mixture of pride and profound sorrow. The abbot had known that the gold on those pages was bought with the tithes of the starving, and the emeralds were polished by the tears of the widow. He had realized, perhaps 40 years ago, that the abbey had become a cage for the divine, a place where the word was locked behind iron grates and used to measure the distance between the powerful and the poor. The theft was not a sudden act of desperation, but a 40-year meditation on restitution. The master had not died in the crypt. He had simply stepped out of the frame of the institutional world to wait for a time when the gold could be returned to the light without. Causing a war, Thomas reflects on the nature of medieval wrongdoing. It is rarely the dramatic, cinematic villainy of the modern imagination. It is instead a series of small, quiet choices, a key turned a fraction too far. A bag of indigo borrowed from the laundry, a mason's mark etched into a side door to signal that the way is clear. The master of the blue key was not a sorcerer, but a collective of the quiet and the tired, the lay brothers who scrubbed the floors, the artisans who knew the alchemy of the earth, and the old monks who had grown weary of hoarding the sun. They had moved the codex not with a shout, but with a whisper. They had replaced the weight on the lectern with a ledger because they knew the abbey lived on the illusion of weight, not the presence of the holy. They knew that as long as the iron grate was locked, the monks would believe the treasure was still there. The crime was not the taking of the book. The crime was the centuries of belief that God lived in a box. He stands up and approaches the hanging pages. He touches one, the leaf that once held the genealogy of Christ. It is soft, like the ear of a lamb. The ink is gone, the gold is gone, but the indentations of the quill are still there, a tactile ghost of the labor that went into its creation. He understands now why the master had him drink from the bowl. The gold had to be moved from the parchment into the blood. The beauty was never meant to stay on the page. It was meant to be ingested, to become the fuel for the spirit's own journey. He feels the warmth in his chest again, a steady, sun-like radiance that makes the cold air of the marsh feel like a soft caress. He is the new vessel. He is the living codex. The theft was a translation from the static to the kinetic, from the object to the experience. He begins to unhook the pages from their silken threads, his movements slow and reverent. He does not fold them. He lays them flat in his satchel, one by one. They are light, almost weightless, as if the removal of the gold has allowed them to defy gravity. As he works, he thinks of the abbot back at Saint's. The abbot will be sitting at his desk now, looking at the accounts, unaware that his most precious asset has become a handful of white skin and a memory of blue. Thomas feels a sudden, sharp empathy for the man. The abbot is not a villain. He is a man trapped in the architecture of his own making. He is a man who believes that to lose the gold is to lose the faith. Thomas realizes that his final task is not to return the book, but to return the peace. He must go back and show the abbot that the empty lectern is not a tragedy, but a beginning. He steps out of the tower and begins the walk back toward the bridge with the 3 archers. The marsh is waking up. The herons are rising from the reeds, their long wings beating the air with a rhythmic hush-hush. He sees the emeralds now as jewels to be sold, but as green sparks in the mud, catching the morning light and reflecting the color of the moss. He sees the dragonflies, their wings shimmering with a hint of that impossible indigo. The world has been painted with the contents of the book. The master did not destroy the codex. He used it to illuminate the entire valley. The birds are carrying the psalms in their throats, and the river is flowing with the liquid gold of the Gospels. It is a masterpiece that can never be stolen again, because it is everywhere at once. He reaches the bridge and finds the wooden bird still sitting on the stone parapet. He picks it up and smiles. The blue paint is dry now, a hard, protective shell. He realizes that the master, the woman, Isabeau, and the child were all parts of the same quiet movement, the movement of the light back to its source. They are the people who live in the margins of the world, the ones who know that the most valuable things are those that cannot be held. He tucks the bird into his sleeve and looks back at the tower. It is just a ruin again, a hollow shell of flint and ivy. The mystery has been solved, but the wonder remains. The walk back to Oakhaven is long and slow. Thomas does not hurry. He watches the way the sun plays on the fields, noticing the gold in the wheat and the blue in the shadows of the hedgerows. He understands now that medieval life is a constant cycle of loss and renewal, a long, slow breathing of the earth. The theft of the codex was just a single exhale in a history of breaths. He thinks of the townspeople, the stonebreakers, and the weavers. They do not need a golden book in a locked room. They need the light that he carries in his blood. He feels a profound sense of purpose, a quiet resolve to live the rest of his life as a scribe of the spirit, writing the word not on vellum, but on the hearts of those he meets. He reaches the gates of Oakhaven as the midday bells are beginning to ring. The sound is different to his ears, now not a command, but a song. He passes the guards, who are still sitting on their stools, their pikes leaning against the wall. They look at him and see only a tired monk with a worn satchel. They do not see the gold in his eyes or the blue radiance beneath his skin. He is a secret walking through the world, a shadow that has learned how to carry the sun. He goes to the cathedral one last time, standing in the chapel of St. Jude. The light is no longer projecting the map. The sun has moved too high. The clear glass is just clear glass again, full of bubbles and ripples. He touches the pane where the gold flake was embedded, and he feels a faint warmth, a lingering echo of the journey. He leaves the town and starts the journey back to St. The road is the same, but he is different. Each step is a prayer of gratitude. He thinks of the empty scriptorium and the cold, silent hall. He knows that his return will be met with questions and perhaps with anger, but he also knows that he has the answer. He will show the abbot the white pages. He will tell him the story of the master and the tower, and he will tell him that the book is not gunit, has simply been read. He will tell him that the gold is in the water, the blue is in the air, and the word is in the breath of the world, as the sun begins to set on the second day of his journey. The towers of St. Sulpice appear on the horizon, dark silhouettes against a purple sky. Thomas stops by the edge of the forest, the same place where he found the blue-stained bag. He reaches into his satchel and pulls out one of the white pages. He holds it up to the fading light. It is beautiful in its simplicity, a blank canvas waiting for a new story to be written. He lets the wind catch the page, and he watches as it spirals upward, a white moth in the twilight. It flies over the walls of the abbey, over the kitchen garden, and disappears into the high windows of the scriptorium. He smiles, knowing that the circle is complete. He walks toward the main gates of the abbey, his staff sounding a steady, peaceful rhythm. The world is settling into its nightly rest. The beeswax candles are being lit, and the monks are preparing for the evening service. Thomas reaches the gates and knocks softly on the wood. The small viewing slit opens, and a pair of eyes looks out at him. "It is Thomas," he says, his voice clear and resonant. "I have returned from the east." The gates creak open, and he steps back into the world of stone and silence. But the silence is no longer heavy. It is full of the music he heard in the tower. He walks toward the chapel, his heart a steady, golden flame. The stone gates of St. Sulpice groan as they swing shut behind Brother Thomas. A sound that feels less like a barrier and more like the closing of a chapter in a book that has finally found its ending. The air within the cloister is exactly as he left Ithic, with the scent of damp earth and the lingering, sweet ghost of insensate to his eyes. The shadows against the walls seem to vibrate with a newfound depth. He walks toward the chapel for the evening service, his steps heavy with the exhaustion of the road, but light with the secret he carries in the hollow of his chest. He takes his accustomed seat in the choir stalls, the dark oak polished by the robes of 1,000 monks before him. The chanting begins, a low tectonic drone of Latin that rises from the floorboards and settles in the rafters. Thomas closes his eyes, and as the voices of his brothers wash over him, he does not see the blackness of his eyelids. He sees the iridescent blue of the marsh and the white, dancing pages of the tower. He realizes that the abbey has not changed, but the way he inhabits it has. He is no longer a guardian of a treasure. He is a witness to its dispersal. Days turn into weeks with the slow, inevitable friction of a glacier. The initial confusion over the empty lectern in the scriptorium does not erupt into a scandal as Thomas had once feared. Instead, it settles into a quiet, pervasive melancholy. The abbot, after several long and private conferences with Thomas in the draughty solar, begins to tell a new story to the community. He speaks of the Codex Aureus, not as something stolen by men, but as something reclaimed by the heavens, a holy sign that the abbey's work was complete, and that they must now turn their eyes to the living world. It is a graceful deception, a soft shroud draped over the truth to protect the hearts of the younger brothers. The iron grate remains locked, but it is no longer polished with the same frantic energy. The dust begins to gather on the red velvet of the empty stand, a fine, grey powder that marks the passage of time more accurately than any water clock. The scriptorium returns to its rhythmic scratching of quills, but the scribes no longer look toward the center of the room for inspiration. They look toward the windows, toward the shifting light of the autumn sun. Brother Antoine, the young scribe with the ink-stained fingers, is the first to notice the change in Thomas. He watches the old man move through the corridors with a strange, serene detachment. One afternoon, while they are working on a humble copy of the Psalms. Antoine leans across the desk, his voice a mere breath in the silence. He asks if the gold will ever come back. Thomas stops his quill, a single drop of black ink hanging from the tip like a dark pearl. He looks at the boy, seeing the reflection of his own younger self in those wide, searching eyes. He tells Antoine that the gold has not left. It has only changed its shape. He points to the window, where a stray sunbeam is illuminating a cobweb in the corner, turning the silk into a lattice of fire. He tells him that the beauty we can touch is only a shadow of the beauty we can breathe. Antoine nods, not entirely understanding, but comforted by the steadiness in Thomas's voice. The boy returns to his work, and the scratching of the quill resumes, a small, persistent sound in the vastness of the medieval afternoon, as the months bleed into years. The story of the great theft begins to lose its sharp edges. In the medieval world, memory is a fluid thing, shaped by the needs of the present and the slow erosion of the past. The villagers in the valley still talk of the night the sky turned blue over the marshes, but they speak of it as a legend, a tale told to children to keep them from wandering too far into the grey wash. The name of the master of the blue key is forgotten, replaced by vague references to a wandering saint or a trick of the mist. The abbey itself begins to undergo a subtle transformation. Without the burden of protecting the world's most famous book, the community grows more outward-looking. They spend less on pigments and more on the infirmary. They spend less time in the dark of the library and more time in the light of the garden. The empty lectern remains, but eventually it is moved to a corner to make room for a new desk. The red velvet is repurposed to line a chest for the altar linens. The gold has been returned to the earth, and the abbey has been returned to the monks. Thomas grows older, his body becoming as thin and brittle as the vellum he once cherished. He spends his final years sitting in the herb garden, watching the bees move among the lavender and the hyssop. He carries the small wooden bird in his sleeve, the blue paint now worn away at the edges to reveal the pale pine beneath. He reflects on the nature of history, how we try to pin it down with dates and names and heavy stone monuments. Yet the truest parts of it are the things that leave no trace. The master, Isabeau, the three-toed tracks in the mud, they are all gone now, dissolved into the same silence that swallowed the gold. He realizes that history is not a solid wall of facts, but a tapestry of whispers, where the most important threads are often the ones that have been pulled out. He is the last person who knows the truth of the tower, and he is content to let that truth die with him. There is a profound dignity in being the final keeper of a secret that no longer needs to be told. The medieval world is a world of transitions, of long twilights and slow dawns. It is a time when the boundaries between the seen and the unseen are perpetually blurred. Thomas watches the seasons turn, the white grip of winter, the green explosion of spring, the golden haze of summer. Each one feels like a page of a different book, one that is being read by the sun. He thinks of the white pages he hid in his satchel, the ones he eventually buried beneath the roots of the great oak in the forest. He imagines them turning back into earth, the fibers of the calfskin merging with the fibers of the tree. He likes the idea that the word is now being shouted by the leaves of the oak, a green gospel that will outlast the abbey itself. He feels a deep, quiet connection to everything around him, a sense that he is not a separate entity, but a part of a long, continuous flow of light and shadow. One evening, as the first frost of a particularly cold winter begins to lace the stones of the cloister with silver, Thomas feels the weight of his years pressing down on him. He finds his way to the scriptorium, which is empty and cold. He walks to the spot where the great lectern once stood. The floorboards are slightly lighter there, a rectangular ghost of the object that had defined his life. He stands in the center of the room, his breath a white plume in the dim light. He thinks of the gold, the indigo, and the emeralds. He thinks of the master's grey eyes and the way the water tasted in the earthenware bowl. He realizes that the theft was the greatest act of love he has ever witnessed. Love that was willing to destroy a masterpiece to save the souls of those who looked at it. He feels a sudden, sharp clarity, a final revelation that the purpose of all art, all faith, and all history is to eventually make itself unnecessary. He leaves the scriptorium and goes to his small, narrow cell. He lies down on his cot, pulling the wool blanket up to his chin. The silence of the abbey is absolute, a profound and peaceful quiet that feels like a benediction. He listens to the rhythmic tolling of the bell for matins, the sound muffled by the falling snow outside. He thinks of the white pages in the forest, the golden water in the marsh, and the blue feathers in the sky. He closes his eyes, and for the last time, he sees the light, not the gold of the world, but the clear, untinted light of the source. He feels himself drifting, a single flake of snow in a vast, dark sky, falling slowly toward a ground that is waiting to catch him. He is no longer afraid of the dark, for he knows that the dark is just the place where the light rests before it begins again. The next morning, the monks find Thomas's cell empty, his soul having departed in the night as quietly as a shadow. They bury him in the small cemetery behind the chapel, marking his grave with a simple stone that bears no name, only the mark of the unclosed circle with the dot in the center. Over the decades, the stone sinks into the earth, and the grass grows over it, hiding the mark from the eyes of the living. The abbey continues its long, slow existence, its walls weathering, its bells ringing, its monks praying. The story of the Codex Aureus becomes a footnote in a dusty chronicle, a curious anecdote about a missing book that was never found. The world moves on. The Middle Ages give way to the Renaissance, and the Renaissance to the modern age. The forests are cleared, the marshes are drained, and the stone towers of the abbey eventually crumble into ruins. But if you were to stand in that valley today, in the quiet hour just before the sun rises, you might still feel a certain vibration in the air. You might notice that the green of the moss is a little more vibrant than it should be, or that the blue of the dragonflies has a shimmer that defies description. You might find a single, tiny flake of gold in the bed of a stream, or see a shadow in the ruins of a tower that doesn't quite match the stone. For the light that Brother Thomas and the Master released into the world is still there, moving through the trees, flowing through the water, and breathing in the wind. The snow continues to fall outside the ruins of St. Sulpice, a silent white lace draped over the broken ribs of the cathedral and the hollowed-out shells of the dormitory cells. Centuries have settled like silt upon the stones, and the names of the men who once walked these corridors have dissolved into the cool, damp earth of the valley. The world has grown louder, faster, and more crowded since the night Brother Thomas first felt the weight of the iron key at his belt. Yet here, in the heart of the forgotten monastery, the silence remains as thick and velvety as a winter shroud. The great theft, that strange, quiet heists of gold and indigo, is no longer a crime or even a mystery. It has become a part of the geology of the place, a hidden layer of grace buried beneath the moss and the lichen. If one were to sit among these ruins as the moon begins its slow, silver climb over the ridgeline, the air would feel not empty, but full. It is a fullness born of objects that have been let go, of treasures that have been unmade, so that they might finally belong to everyone. The theft was the final, most perfect act of devotion the Abbey ever performed. A shedding of the physical to make room for the eternal in the long drifting history of the Middle Ages. There were many such disappearances, relics that vanished from their reliquaries, manuscripts that slipped into the shadows of private libraries, and jewels that were ground into dust for the sake of a single hidden painting. We often think of these as losses, as holes in the fabric of our heritage, but as we drift toward sleep, we might see them differently. Perhaps these lost things were not stolen by greed, but by the same necessity that makes the trees drop their leaves in autumn. They will return to the cycle of the earth, their beauty becoming a part of the scent of the pine needles and the cold clarity of the mountain streams. The Codex Aureus was not a book that was lost. It was a book that was set free. Its gold is in the goldenrod that grows by the river. Its indigo is in the deep, bruised purple of the twilight sky. Its white vellum is in the very snow that now blankets the stones. The crime was a translation, a slow and patient movement of the sacred from the dark of a vault into the light of the world. It is a quiet truth that the things we guard most fiercely are the things that eventually turn to dust. But the things we scatter with a generous hand are the ones that never truly leave us. Imagine, now, the ghost of the scriptorium, a space made of moonlight and memory. The heavy oak desks have rotted away. The iron grates have rusted into red streaks on the stone, and the scent of beeswax has been replaced by the smell of cold stone and wet cedar. But the space where the lectern once stood is still there, a hollow in the air that feels warm to the touch. It is the center of a circle that has no end. Brother Thomas, the Master, and Isabeau are no longer characters in a story. They are the very rhythm of the night. They are the slow creak of the freezing branches, the soft thud of snow falling from a ledge, and the rhythmic, steady pulse of the stars overhead. Their motivations, once so complex and fraught with the weight of faith and fear, have been simplified by time into a single, quiet breath. They wanted to see the light, and in the end, they became it. We are the inheritors of their silence. We are the ones who sleep in the world they helped to illuminate, a world where the most precious things are the ones we cannot hold in our hands. The history of the world is a long, slow lullaby, a narrative that doesn't end so much as it fades into the distance. Each century is a verse, each life is a single, quiet note, and the silences between the notes are just as important as the music itself. As you settle deeper into your blankets, feel the weight of your own history becoming light. Like the white pages of the Codex, let the stories you have written today be washed clean by the coming of the night. You do not need to carry the gold of your worries or the heavy jewels of your ambitions into the world of sleep. You can leave them on the lectern of the waking world, knowing that the shadows will take care of them. The night is a sanctuary, a scriptorium of the soul, where the only work is the work of resting, of breathing, and of being still. The walls around you are thick and safe, the hearth of your heart is warm, and the darkness outside is not a void, but a soft, inviting depth where the light goes to replenish itself. Listen to the sound of the wind as it moves through the valley of St. Sulpice, a sound that has not changed in 1,000 years. It is the same wind that carried the golden flakes from the tower, the same wind that rustled the robes of the monks as they walked to mass. It is a slow, steady sigh that says the world is at peace, that the accounts are balanced, and that the treasure is exactly where it needs to be. The ghosts of the Middle Ages are not restless. They are part of the deep, subterranean calm that supports the earth. They are the stone beneath the grass, the water beneath the ice, and the dream beneath the sleep. They have finished their walk, they have told their secrets, and they have found their way home. The mystery of the blue feather and the golden bowl is a story that has been tucked into the folds of time. A warm memory that keeps the cold at bay. As the moon reaches its zenith, the ruins of the abbey seem to glow with an internal, pearlescent light. The snow is a pristine, unwritten page, waiting for the first light of the new day. But that day is far off, a horizon that does not yet exist. For now, there is only the present moment, the deep, velvet embrace of the midnight hour. The stars are distant and steady, their light taking centuries to reach your eyes. A slow-motion history lesson written in fire. They are the same stars that Brother Thomas watched from the bridge, and their message is the same as it was then. You are safe, you are part of the whole, and the light is always, always there. The blue key has opened the door to the night, and you have only to step through it and let the shadows catch you. Your breathing is slow, a rhythmic tide that mirrors the rising and falling of the centuries. Your heart is a quiet bell, tolling a soft, internal peace. The world is large, and it is very, very old, and it has seen many things come and go. But it has never forgotten how to hold its children in the dark. The stories of the past are like the embers in a fireplace. They glow with a gentle warmth, providing comfort without the need for a bright, searing flame. Let the story of the monk and the thief drift away now, becoming a part of the background hum of the universe. It is a soft, grey thread in the tapestry of your mind, a detail that is beautiful because it is half hidden. You do not need to remember the ending, because the ending is just a return to the beginning. A circling back to the silence from which everything comes. Sleep is the great translator. It takes the heavy, complicated events of the day and turns them into the light, shimmering language of dreams. It is the master of the blue key, unlocking the constraints of the body and allowing the spirit to wander through the marshes of the grey wash and the hollow towers of the mind. In your dreams, you can walk the white limestone roads of medieval France, smelling the wood smoke and hearing the distant, melodic call of the bells. You can see the gold in the water and the blue in the air, and you can understand, without words, that everything is as it should be. The world is a masterpiece that is being constantly unmade and remade, and tonight, you are given the gift of being a witness to its rest. The lantern has flickered out. The candle has burned down to a small white pool of wax, and the fire has settled into a soft, grey ash. The room is cool and still, a sanctuary of shadows that is perfectly suited for the journey you are about to take. The history of the abbey, the mystery of the book, and the long walk of the monk are all just whispers now, fading into the rhythmic, steady sound of your own breath. The snow continues to fall, a silent blessing upon the earth, burying the ruins and the memories in a layer of profound, white peace. There is no hurry, no urgency, and no more questions to be answered. The truth is in the stillness. The gold is in the dark. The word is in the silence. Gently, the night closes around you, a soft woolen blanket that keeps out the cold and the noise. The world is small, the world is quiet, and you are tucked away in the heart of it. Let the slow, ancient pulse of the earth carry you down into the deep, restorative waters of sleep. The stars will keep watch, the ruins will stay silent, and the light will wait for the morning. You are a part of the long, beautiful story that never ends, a story that is written in the stars and whispered in the wind. Sleep now, in the arms of the history that made you. Sleep now, in the peace of the night that holds you. Sleep, and be at rest. The journey is over, the key has been turned, and the door is softly, slowly, quietly closing. Good night, traveler of the centuries. The light is within you, and the world is at peace. Fading out now, into the soft, velvet dark. Fading away, like the last echo of a bell in a distant valley. Fading, drifting, resting. Deep, deep sleep. Calm, quiet, peace, fading away into the still night.